Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. Folks, we have a wonderful special show today. Someone that has courage, someone that has a heart, someone that knows true Hoosier values that we hopefully will be sending to Washington, D.C. to represent us. Folks, and it is an honor to have in the studio Sarah Janisse Brown, candidate for the 6th Congressional seat here in Indiana. Welcome to the show.
I'm so honored to be here and excited to make America healthy again.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about. It's making America great again. It's making America healthy again. It's making America better for Americans. And that's what sometimes career politicians lose sight of, the fact that they get in it for the donor class, and it should always be about regular Hoosiers like you and me.
Right. I'm in it for my grandkids.
You know, that's why I ran for the Senate, because I'm like, I want Indiana to be a little bit like what it was when I was young, and saved for them so that they can experience, the benefits of free markets, the benefits of liberty, the benefits of just, being an American. Unfortunately, today, that is being challenged greatly. Well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to this decision to run for the United States Congress?
All right, it goes way back. When I was a little girl, I didn't live in Indiana, but my family visited Indiana almost every summer, and it was actually the highlight of my year to camp at Indiana Dunes State Park, to go to the art festivals at Talbot Street, Chesterton, and to visit the Children's Museum. So as a kid, being raised by a military dad and an artist mom, I loved traveling all over the country. We visited 47 states, and Indiana was my favorite. So I can't say I'm a lifelong Hoosier, but what I can say is I chose Indiana.
Well, coming from a military family, people understand that, moving around and being serving your country, what an honorable, wonderful thing.
Yeah, it was such an honor to be raised by my dad, who retired Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. My involvement in politics and my love for America really goes back to when we were young, like you mentioned, the Indiana that existed when we were kids, the America that existed when we were kids, when kids could play outside until the streetlights came on, when people felt safe. I can remember being a child, riding bikes around the neighborhood with my friends, exploring the woods and the graveyard behind the house. And, you would see the police patrol the neighborhoods, and you love the policeman just as much as you love the ice cream truck.
Well, but I remember I grew up in the 70s. And back then, your circle of friends was really who was within bike riding distance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was who you went to church with, who you went to Sunday school with, and who you went to school with. That was your circle of friends. There really wasn't anyone else out of that loop. Today with the internet, it's a changed world today.
Yeah, you don't even know who your friends are. Your kids are talking to a 14-year-old in Japan who's actually a 45-year-old man in L.A.
And that's that's one of the reasons I think you're running, is to protect the Indiana that we grew up in, for our kids in the future.
Exactly. My family moved back to Indiana, my husband and I and our baby and another one on the way, in 1999. It was our dream to come back to Indiana. He's from Indiana, but he went to college at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Florida. And then we were married in Indiana. And when he was finished with school, we moved back to Indiana so we could have the seasons and start our own little homestead. So we bought 3.5 acres, started a homestead just in time for Y2K. Does anyone remember Y2K?
Yeah, it was going to be a disaster.
I had an aunt who was trying to get me to get chickens, plant a garden, can food. She was absolutely looking forward to going back to the Stone Age. She thought it would be great. And what I realized, though, during that time of starting to just have a lot of fun with planting our own food, getting chickens and goats, was that I felt healthier and better than I ever had on that little homestead, I began to realize that you can't do whatever you want in America anymore. If you do whatever you want on your land, you'll have the zoning guys come knocking on your door and telling you, no, you can't do that.
No, you can't have chickens, for instance.
Exactly.
And I think, I think people, I'm a chicken farmer. I think people should absolutely be allowed to have chickens. I love having chickens.
If you can have pit bulls, shouldn't you be allowed to have chickens?
Right.
It's ridiculous. So eventually, my husband and I and our 3 kids and one on the way moved to Main Street in Fortville, Indiana, to a big yellow Victorian house. And we wanted to grow our family, be part of a Main Street, Norman Rockwell type of town. If you
Living
know
the
Fortville,
American dream.
Yeah, if you know Fortville, Indiana, it has a charming Main Street surrounded by farms.
Did you have a white picket fence?
No, I had a brown picket fence. Okay. But we had a lot of fun raising our kids on Main Street because we could go to the park, they could ride bikes, you could walk to the Chinese food restaurant, the pizza place. I had wanted to have chickens and goats and ducks in my half-acre backyard. And so I looked at the law and it said certain farm animals are prohibited. And on that list was horses, cows, pigs, chickens, and bees. And for some reason, rabbits. But a lot of people had rabbits anyway. And so I thought, well, if they can have rabbits, I can have chickens. And I can definitely have goats because they're not on the list. Mm-hmm. I believed that raw milk was the best for my kids. Mm-hmm. They would get flu-like symptoms whenever they would have grocery store milk. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, let's just have a goat in the backyard. So we had a couple goats in the backyard. And we were doing all kinds of fun 4-H type of stuff, homeschooling the kids. And the police showed up one day and said, it's illegal for you to have goats in the backyard. And I said, why don't you show me that law? And he showed me the law, and I said, no, goats are not on the list. And he said, but the town council agreed that you cannot have goats, and goats are implied. And I said, I think we're going to need to ask the judge. And I ended up taking the town to court and having Judge Snow in Hancock County decide whether or not I could have goats in the backyard. This was my second time fighting for the American dream. First, it was a cow
City Hall for Hoosiers, right?
Yeah. So the first time I got involved in fighting for food freedom, we had a cow share on Apple Family Farm so we could get raw milk from a cow that we shared there. And they got a cease and desist and you're going to go to jail and everything else. And that's the first time I really got involved in fighting for the family farm. And we won. And so then when they showed up for my goats, I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to take the town to court and the judge will look at the law. And so the judge looked at the law. I represented myself and he said, goats are not included on this list, and if Town Hall wants to make a law against goats, they need to pass a law in a public hearing and go through the proper process. That was on the news, national newspapers, and then people in the community began to say to me, you really need to run for office. You really need to be on town council, because many people came to me saying that when the police showed up and told them they couldn't do this or that and town hall said this or that, they thought because the police said so, that was the law. And a big problem in America right now is that people think that your rights come from the government and not from God. But I was raised to understand that there is a self-evident truth that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are God-given rights. And if I want to have a chicken in my backyard, and if I want to grow tomatoes in my front yard, that is my God-given right. And the right to food, to raise your own food, to eat your own food, and to source your own food wherever you want to get it is a human right.
And it's a human right. And folks, the backstory on, for instance, raw milk is we are basically forced to buy milk from these large mega corporations. And it's under the guise of being pasteurized, which that's your choice, in my opinion, whether you buy that or not. But you're forced to only buy a milk that really only large corporations can meet the standards to produce economically.
Right. When my family was doing mission work in Ukraine and in Italy, Croatia, they had raw milk kiosks. The farmers would come and stock it with raw milk, and you would come bring your jugs, and you would fill your own jugs with raw milk. And nobody was getting sick. I've been giving my kids raw milk for the past 25 years, and my children have not needed antibiotics for an illness basically ever in the past 20 years. The only time we've needed a doctor's prescription for anything was skin infections, infected bug bites, things like that. My kids have grown up so healthy. I don't know any other way to have healthy kids besides letting them play outside and eat healthy food.
I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV, but it seems to me raw milk, you're not getting everything that's good killed.
Right.
And what you're talking about on the immune system for your kids, the cow is passing through some of that immunity to what we face in life today.
Yeah. When I was a little girl, my parents actually were getting raw milk from the Altadena Dairy in California. And so I was raised on raw milk. And then when I had kids, I did the best I could to get them raw milk. And I have enjoyed incredible health. I've never had any health problems at all. Never had trouble having my 10 kids, 5 in my 20s, 5 in my 30s. I just enjoy beautiful health. My family enjoys beautiful health. And even the 5 children we adopted from Ukraine who came to us very unhealthy, within a year, they were all enjoying vibrant health.
And folks, this is a congressional issue as well. Congressman Thomas Massie is actually working on legislation to make it possible for Americans to be able to enjoy raw milk again.
And I appreciate that so much. A lot of times government just gets in the way of what's actually good for us. A big problem is the way the federal government is subsidizing unhealthy food production practices. And this is leading to an overabundance of GMO grains being produced that they have to do something with it. So they produce all kinds of processed foods. They are feeding GMO grains to our animals.
And it's a huge issue with junk food is how ultra processed that is. If you look at the nutrition label and what's included on some of these products, I mean, it is a laundry list of words you can't even pronounce.
This is a really great point, and I encourage every parent to flip the label over. When I was 14 years old, my little sister had to be homeschooled because she was allergic to red dye number 40. And when she was in school, she kept getting exposed to it. Even in the school lunches, you wouldn't even know that there were food colorings in the school lunches, and she would end up in the emergency room. Finally, my parents were like, we're just going to have to pull her out and homeschool her. I'd never even heard of homeschooling at this point. I began helping my mom with the cooking a lot during that period of time, and we would go to the grocery store together, and she said, here's how you can tell whether or not it's real food. Real food is food that doesn't have a million weird ingredients. She said, if you flip over the label and you can't read it in plain English, it's not real food.
Okay, very good. So folks, we're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to continue this discussion with Sarah Janisse Brown, candidate for the 6th Congressional District here in Indiana. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. Freedom 95, the right station for talk. Folks, in the studio today is congressional candidate for the 6th District here in Indiana, Sarah Janisse Brown, along with Justin. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, John. Always happy to be on the show, and it's very nice to meet you, Sarah. I've loved hearing your story so far, but I'm curious as to what really was the tipping point from you going from living the American dream, raising like chickens and goats, to now running for
and enjoying raw milk.
Exactly, enjoying raw milk, to now you've decided to run for a U.S. congressional seat.
I first got involved in politics 16 years ago when I ran for town council in Fortville. 3 other people were on the ballot. I pretty much got double the votes of any of them. I didn't expect that because I was a homeschooling mom with 8 kids under 11 years old at the time. But when we saw that the deadline to get on the ballot was one day away, and the only person running was someone that we didn't want in. I said to my husband, "You need to run for town council." He said, "No, you need to run." I said, No, you need to run." He's like, "Get in the car. Let's go down to the State House. We're getting your name on the ballot. People keep telling you you should run," and I believe it. So I got on the ballot. At the same time, two of my friends got on the ballot as well because they didn't want the other guy to win. And I'm like, if I would have known they were running, I would have supported them.
Right.
But I went anyway and had a blast really dealing with government overreach and helping Main Street go from being a deserted Main Street to a Main Street with festivals, events, partnering with the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses to turn that Main Street into a vibrant place with lots of thriving businesses. After that, my husband and I wanted to live a lifelong dream of working in the former Soviet Union doing volunteer work. But while I was serving on town council, I was always the town council member that was sent to all the shindigs and hobnobs at the State House and all the conferences. And I kept ending up at these round tables full of people who were bored and discouraged, who had no hope, who were trying to fix their towns and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And I ended up being the idea person at every table, telling them how we succeeded so quickly, often just getting back to the fact that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what makes a town thrive. And I had so many great ideas that they began to tell me, you really need to run for the state, or you need to run nationally because you have ideas that can really help turn the state and country around. And so that idea was planted after hearing it over and over and over. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. I have like 9 kids now, and a dream we haven't fulfilled to go do volunteer work in the former Soviet Union. So my husband and I moved to Ukraine. We picked up 5 more kids whose mom couldn't raise them. They had ended up in the orphanage and had been there for 5 years. And we still had a vision and a dream to come back to Indiana and get involved in politics. But we decided that we would do it when our youngest was 10 years old and when most of the kids had been launched into adulthood. So my youngest child is 11 years old now. Last time around, 2 years ago, when Jefferson Shreve was on the ballot, 3 of my friends were also on the ballot, and it took me back to Fortville, Indiana, where I had 3 friends on the ballot. Well, 2 friends on the ballot, myself and the guy that nobody wanted. I remember really struggling to decide who to vote for. I met John Jacobs back in Hancock County ages ago, went to church with Jameson Carrier, and my husband flies with Mike Speedy doing relief trips to North Carolina after the hurricane. This is a really, really weird situation where we might end up with the one we don't want, because these 3 guys are going to split the Christian conservative vote, really.
And we got a liberal. And so, folks, Jefferson Shreve has voted for literally trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, more than $4 trillion of new government debt. Just last year, that is $30,000 per taxpayer of new debt added to your shoulders. $30,000 just in 1 year. And that's why we're having the inflation we have today.
Exactly.
Because these people go to Washington, D.C. that want to be career politicians, and then they quickly fold once they get there. And that's what happened to Jefferson Shreve. And unfortunately, with all of the Indiana delegation, they all voted for that. They speak conservative at Lincoln Day dinners here, but then they go and vote liberal in Washington, D.C.
Well, I want to butt in a little bit and talk about how kind of disappointing it was how Shreve got in, because when you look at the Republican primary for that, the total votes cast were 71,000 votes. Jefferson Shreve only got 20,000 of those votes. So roughly about 50,000 people, in a way, voted against Jefferson Shreve by voting for another candidate, and yet he's the guy who still gets in. And that's just a little bit disappointing in my view.
Well, hopefully that will change with this primary.
Yeah, so I remember talking with the different candidates running against him last time, and I learned what he did when he was running for mayor. He decided to basically become a Democrat so he could compete, and produced a pro-choice commercial, got an F rating from the NRA, ended up paying about $300 a vote for the 20,000 votes he did get. And it made me sick to have to see that name being the only one on the ballot. So I got an email from a friend 48 hours before the door was closing to get on the ballot in Indiana, and he said, "You need to get on the ballot." And I wasn't thinking U.S. Congress, but I knew that my youngest daughter was now 11 years old, and it was a really great time in our life to get involved. We've been back in Indiana from doing mission work overseas 5 years, and planted lots of trees, raised lots of animals, started a homeschooling co-op on our farm, just absolutely living the dream. I could continue this dream for the rest of my life, but I want my grandkids to have the same opportunity.
Exactly.
I own a publishing company. I've published and authored over 360 books designed to help kids focus on their major starting at age 6 or 7. So if they are interested in space, they're going to study space. Journalism, they're going to study journalism. Horses, they're going to study horses. Whatever the kid is passionate about, I know how to organize their entire education around their passions so they'll be an expert on whatever subjects that they love. Well, I just published a book called Run, Win, Lead to help kids learn how to run for office. And I partnered with David Lance, who was a campaign manager for someone who had run for U.S. Congress in District 6. So this book covered the U.S. Congress Indiana 6th District election. And I actually edited, contributed, and published this book.
So you published the book on how to run for Congress.
And so I knew what I was getting into because I had just published the book specifically creating that race as the example. So I thought, this might be it. And my husband and I had a big talk, and he knew that this was my calling.
It's absolutely a calling. It's a religious calling. It really is.
It is. And so I hadn't decided what I was going to run for, and my husband said, 100%, whatever is on your heart, do it. So I went down to the State House trying to gather the courage to put my name on the ballot, walked in, and went ahead and did it. Because when I looked up who was running against Jefferson Shreve, because I didn't want to be on the ballot with some good man trying to run against him, I would have supported somebody else, found out no one was running.
And one of the issues, I have with him is he's using the congressional franking privilege to send out letters with his name real big on it, but taxpayer dollars are paying for that.
You'd think he'd have enough money to send out his own mailers.
And there was a controversy on that, folks. That just came out in the news last week that he may have actually violated the law by doing that so close to an election, because there are rules and regulations on how close to a primary election that you can actually do that.
Yeah. That's not the kind of thing we want to see coming from our congressional representatives. The representatives should represent the people.
Right. And an issue with Jefferson Shreve is he was just shopping for a office to run for. So it didn't work out for him to run for mayor of Indianapolis. So then he just said, I'll just go do that. So he flipped from being a liberal in Indy to being a conservative running for the 6th district. And, folks, I think when you run for office, you got to stick to that office and put your heart in that.
Yeah.
And it's not just about what the next office will be after that. And I think that's unfortunately what a lot of these career politicians do, is they're just playing musical chairs with whatever political office they happen to be running for at that time. But while they're doing that, nothing actually happens then on being fiscally conservative. It just gets thrown out the window because they don't care. They're only in it for their career. They're not in it for what's good for our grandkids in the future. And that's why Sarah sees that in her heart. We don't want to destroy the American dollar, 30 years from now. It's already being destroyed today. With what inflation is, anyone goes into McDonald's and you see what these prices are today, and you say, well, I want to blame McDonald's for that. No, you have to blame your career politicians in Washington who keep printing more and more money. That has a direct impact on inflation. The more money supply you print, and that's what they're doing with all this national debt, the less and less your dollars will be worth.
Exactly.
So, Sarah, what is your view on the pro-life movement?
So I first got involved in the pro-life movement when I was about 17 years old, and I saw a video of a 12-week baby being aborted.
Wow.
And it absolutely broke my heart because it was an ultrasound image and it showed the baby just playing around in the womb, and then you saw the claw come in and start ripping the baby apart. You cannot unsee that. And it absolutely broke my heart. So I began to look into ways to be a voice in the pro-life movement. And for me, one of the biggest things about being pro-life is having a big family, bringing children into the world, having children born into a family where the mom and dad love each other, love their kids, and build their lives around family.
So you are living what you talk about. This is your faith.
It is. It is.
Yep. So folks, we're out of time for this segment. We will be right back. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. The right station for talk, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of Indiana. So, folks, I'm here in the studio today with Sarah Janisse Brown, running for the 6th Congressional District here in Indiana. And one of the big issues that all of us Hoosiers are really concerned about is gun rights, the Second Amendment. Sadly, we get a lot of politicians who at election time pretend to be pro-Second Amendment, but when it actually comes to how they actually feel and indeed how they advertise, it's totally different.
So, as we know, Jefferson Shreve, he's been a little bit of a flip-flopper on gun rights. And
little bit?
I'm putting it the nice way. I figure I'll be nice on the show today. I'll be nice to him. So, but he's definitely been a flip-flopper on gun rights and Second Amendment. So, if you would you like to get more into maybe what your views on the Second Amendment is and how they contrast to that of Congressman Shreve?
He hasn't had the opportunity to live in places where we don't have the same rights you have in Indiana. And we've lived in Hawaii, where it's illegal to have a gun. I think you can have a hunting gun, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops.
Extensive hoops.
I've lived in Ukraine, where literally the neighbor, who is part of the mafia, who has all the weapons he wants, came over to my house threatening to murder my adopted children, and we had to flee our home. There was no opportunity for self-defense. We had to leave our home. We were never able to go back to that home. Then I have also been in Yugoslavia, where I got stuck in a country during the ceasefire when President Clinton was bombing. It's no longer Yugoslavia. Now it's chopped up into lots of smaller countries, where I was in a situation where I was on a bus taking some supplies to Christians during the ceasefire, because the civilians had no access to food or groceries. And they stopped the bus and found out that most of the people on the bus were part of the black market. I was a teenager along with the two other people who were going into the country with me to bring the supplies. And the military got on the bus with these giant guns. And they ordered all of the people off the bus. They looked at us and said, "You guys are just kids. You can stay." And I watched as all the people on the bus were lined up against a chain link fence with a bunch of barbed wire, and there was a 22-year-old soldier with a giant gun pointed at them as the bus rolled away. I don't know what happened to those people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Our country is precious. Our right to bear arms is precious, not just the right to defend ourselves when the mafia boss comes over threatening to murder your children. We have the right and responsibility to bear arms to protect ourselves even from government takeovers. A lot of people don't understand. This is what the founding fathers were saying when they wanted the people to be well armed. And so in other countries, the people have no defense against government takeovers. And
that's one of the first things the Nazis did in Germany was take away the guns from people.
yeah,
So they had no option but to succumb to the horrible things that happened.
it is. It's devastating.
And then
Yeah.
the other thing on gun control is, criminals don't follow the law.
Right. Yeah. Plenty
And
of criminals in Ukraine had guns.
And it's the same here in Chicago, for instance, where guns are basically banned. But look at the murder rate in Chicago. It is always, let's do more restrictions. But the restrictions always only target actual legal gun owners.
Right.
Because the criminals don't care. They're not going to follow that law because they're criminals.
Exactly. So, why are we punishing the good guy for the deeds of the bad guy?
And that's what Jefferson Shreve explicitly did in Indianapolis when he was running for mayor.
He wanted to make it like Chicago.
Yes, and we don't want...
No.
Indy's got enough crime right now, but we don't need to be as bad as Chicago. Absolutely not.
Right. One thing that we moved back to Indiana for was the freedom to homeschool, the freedom with the First and Second Amendments. Freedom is popular. People are coming from all kinds of other places where freedom is being crunched down on and moving to Indiana, hopefully not bringing their liberal values. But what we have in Indiana is precious. It's worth protecting. And when Jefferson Shreve ran for mayor, I saw a lot of compromise, and I didn't want that to happen to the country. So I got on the ballot because I looked into the eyes of my baby grandsons and thought, I want America to exist for them. Constitutional carry should be legal in all 50 states. We won't even go to Chicago because we can't carry.
Well, it's the Wild West there right now. For criminals, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're not allowed to bring a gun there.
Yeah.
So specifically, folks, what we're talking about this is Jefferson Shreve actually ran an ad where he was talking about restricting Second Amendment rights when he was running for mayor of Indianapolis. And so as a career politician does, he was targeting his message for liberals in Indianapolis, trying to get that vote. But then when he switched over to the congressional seat for the 6th district, he suddenly became a gun rights advocate. And bizarrely, and this was just in the news last week, he got the NRA endorsement. But folks, I'm a farmer and I see where the Indiana Farm Bureau endorses people all the time that are not farmers. These endorsements, those are bought and paid for, unfortunately, behind the scenes. You can't trust a lot of these national organizations. What they're working on is really just raising money. It's not about the issue itself.
Yeah, most devastating to me was to see the pro-life endorsement that he got. If you have a conversation with me and you learn about my history and then you take a good look at what he's stood for, that doesn't make any sense at all. The NRA endorsement only makes sense if there's an investment that brings forgiveness into the NRA. I don't know. It's baffling. I've heard from so many people in the 6th district and all over Indiana that were absolutely shocked that you can go from an F rating from the NRA to getting their endorsement. I mean, he hasn't even explained his change of heart.
Exactly. You talked about looking at what he stands for. You don't know what he stands for because he flip-flops all the time. So when you flip-flop like that, how are you supposed to know what someone stands for?
Well, and the flip-floppers are always one that are just searching for it as a career.
Exactly.
They're not there to serve their terms.
When Shreve ran for mayor, I don't think he was actually trying to be mayor. I think his goal was for Congress, and he just knew that he was a relative unknown, so he knew that running for mayor of Indianapolis would get his name out. I think that's why he ran for mayor. I don't think he was actually trying to be mayor.
I think he was trying, but then it was just a colossal failure, and so he's like, well, I've spent all this money, I have all this name recognition, and he won a very narrow
Oh, yeah.
primary
72% of the people did not vote for him. And that's why I think I have a chance.
So, folks, remember that. Jefferson Shreve, yes, he is the incumbent, but he was chosen by a very small minority of the voters in the primary last time who didn't know his true positions because he had a lot of money to send out circulars and placards where he was claiming to be pro Second Amendment.
So do you think that the people of Indiana can see through this? Can they see through the NRA endorsement? Can they see through the Farm Bureau endorsement? Can they see through the Susan B. Anthony endorsement? Can they see through the endorsement that even President Trump gave him before I got on the ballot? Can Indiana be tricked?
When I was running for the U.S. Senate, everyone said, oh, endorsements are so important. And what I found for myself, at least, no. People don't like these outside groups telling Hoosiers how to vote. Mm-hmm. It was about, hey, we need actual Hoosiers to represent us, not these national lobbying groups that are in it strictly for the money. And I believe that's why they're all endorsing Shreve, because he's a big donor. He's a donor, and he's the incumbent, and he will help get earmarks for whoever. Right. And so they're in it for the money, not for the policy. Yeah, I'm going to repeat that again. They're in it for the money, not for the policy. So beef I have with these national lobbying groups is, if you look at what their salaries are for the directors and the presidents and the CEOs of these national groups, it is shocking how many people are making millions of dollars off of the abortion issue and saying, oh, it's pro-life, you have to be pro-life, but it's really just about a gravy train for this group in D.C.
Yeah, it's pro-life when you're actually in the emergency room and you say, find another way to save my life. I'm not going to take that abortion medication. Right. So, wow, that's just
Sarah,
incredible.
Exactly. And, Sarah, you talked about, can Hoosiers be tricked? What I'll say is that as long as there's people like John and you, Sarah, and me who actually shine the light on this stuff, mm-hmm. I don't think they will be. Now, if people just sit back and don't do anything and don't try to fight, then sure. But as long as people try to fight, I don't think Hoosiers will be tricked.
And so, folks, remember, the election is Tuesday, May 5th. Please vote. Please show up and vote Republican for Sarah Janisse Brown. Please, please, please. It is, I always give this blanket thing. I don't like voting for any incumbent. I would always myself vote for the new person no matter what, just because you have to have new blood. I am a firm believer in term limits, for instance.
Mm-hmm, me too.
I think, because if I ever run for something again, I want to run for that and work my heart out on it and not worry about reelection. I want to work for Hoosiers, not for all these donors. And that's what happens with so many candidates. They go to Washington, and I think they all meant well when they go, or at least some of them.
Right.
I'm not so sure about.
I agree. Most people go because they want to do good for their country.
But the issue is, after 2 terms, they only look at it for their reelection, and they lose sight of the fact on why they went there in the first place.
Right.
And I think that happens over and over and over. Again, like my political opponent Jim Banks back in the day when he first started out, I think he really meant well. But unfortunately, after you've served so long, you just become beholden to the donors, and you're no longer responsible to actual Hoosiers.
Yeah. Well, I've said over and over, the first thing I'm going to do when I go to Washington, D.C. is put a sign on the door of my office that says, "Welcome Hoosiers. All others, including lobbyists, must be represented by a voter from Indiana's 6th District."
Wow. That's wonderful.
Represent the people, and I will not talk to a lobbyist or invite them into my office unless they are represented by a voter from the Indiana 6th District. You'll have to go to my website, votesarahbrown.com, and you're going to see endorsements from many ordinary, everyday
That's the endorsement that counts.
From Indiana's 6 districts. Farmers, parents, educators, town council members, people who know me and have seen the positive impact I've made on the lives around me. Mm-hmm. And I always say there's nothing that anyone could do to get me to betray my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and the voters in District 6. I believe that we have a representative government. We, the voters, represent them. I'm here to represent Indiana, not big, wealthy, powerful corporations, not lobbyists, not big government, not myself, but the people.
Right. Amen to all of that. And, you just mentioned something, and I want to talk about that in the next segment, if you will, and that's health care, and how health care in the United States is just exponentially more expensive today than it's ever been, but the quality of care is less and less because we have to fight with these mega corporations, just to be seen sometimes.
Yeah.
So, folks, this is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So, folks, in the studio today is Sarah Janisse Brown. We began to talk about healthcare a little bit, and I want to talk about something that I just saw on Twitter the other day. And I think all Hoosiers understand and empathize with this. And so this is an example, and it's by Wall Street Apes on Twitter. It talks about an American is a healthy 28-year-old. He decides to skip paying for health insurance this year because the cheapest plan was $900 per month with a high deductible. He had to spend 2 nights in the ER without insurance. He breaks down the bill. This is my receipt from spending 2 days in the hospital. It totaled $24,000. My CAT scan alone was $8,300. Laboratory fees, $6,000. IV therapy, $1,000. $4,000 in total for the time he was there. While $24,000 seems like a lot of money, let me show you something, is what I'm actually paying was $2,478, because when you don't have insurance, these hospitals give you a discount. They discounted $22,000 off his bill. But if I had insurance, it would have been $24,000. Folks, we have this insurance scam in the United States, and it's unfortunately infected every politician that I know of. They all take money from these big drug producers, and United Healthcare in particular, the hospital groups. A big issue I have is I think you have to preserve what I talked about earlier in this program was, how life used to be. You could used to go to a family doctor and pretty much get everything taken care of. What's happened in my own home county, the local hospital has bought out the offices of almost all the local doctors. So you have no choice but to go through the local hospital and go through this insurance scam, just to see, if you had a runny nose or whatever, something simple. Everything is ultra expensive because they want you to run through their system. So, Sarah, what would you bring in your perspective on this to Washington that would be different and helpful to regular Hoosiers?
So for the past 15 years, my family has been using a medical sharing called Samaritan Ministries, where if anyone has a healthcare issue or a medical bill, all the other people in the medical sharing community send a check to help everybody else pay. And we stay away from the doctor as much as possible in our own family because we tend to be very healthy. But I did have a few emergency room visits, and my kids have had a couple emergency room visits. And with this health sharing thing that's way less expensive than insurance, we not only have the community all paying for the medical bills together, but we get the discount for self-pay. So they'll say, well, it was going to be $37,000 for your emergency room visit, but then they knock it down to like $5,000 since it's a health sharing. And I really think that a medical spending and savings account would make way more sense. This crazy thing where the hospitals and the doctors will charge people with insurance $70,000 and people without insurance $4,000.
Well, in the instance of my local county, it's a nonprofit. But boy, you wouldn't guess that from the prices they charge and the salaries and the massive new building they just built. It is just exorbitant what healthcare is doing. And it's because, folks, all these people involved in that, everyone's on the grift on it. And the politicians are in on the grift because they take so much money. If you look at the donation history of all these congressmen, you see so often they are just being paid off by these health insurance companies. And that's why we don't get real, meaningful market conditions for healthcare. And we used to have that back in the day.
I used to work at the Arnold Palmer Hospital for Women and Children as a birth assistant for women who came in alone and didn't have anybody to help them during their birth. I was the support person. I remember being at the water fountain and a doctor getting a call, and his friend was saying, "Hey, are you going to be able to make it to the golf game?" And he said, "Oh, I got a lady who's in labor. She's taking a long time." And he's like, "Good idea." And so I'm in the room with the woman, and he comes in and he looks at the chart and he goes, "Oh my goodness, your baby is in distress. We need an emergency C-section right now." I looked at the chart and I saw that the baby's heart rate was dipping just a little bit during the contractions, but always going right back up to normal between contractions. And I was trained to know that that's completely normal. Mm-hmm. Well, he wanted to get to his golf game, and he gave the woman a C-section to make that happen. To have major surgery and a newborn baby on the same day, that was just the beginning. And I began to see that doctors were giving C-sections sometimes because they would make more money, and also were encouraging women to take medications because they would get kickbacks. And working in the hospital, I began to learn that if they promote a medication, they have the incentives of getting a little kickback for that. So the women in labor who wanted to have natural births were being pestered nonstop and guilt-tripped into taking medications so that doctors could get kickbacks. And I ended up having 9 of my babies at home, self-pay to a midwife, perfectly healthy, normal births. And a lot of women are choosing to have their babies at home because it's becoming so expensive, and it's a big fight to have the birth you want in the hospital because of all the incentives.
Well, they're it's just like COVID, for instance. Look at how much the COVID vaccine was financially incentivized by the vaccine industry. That was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. And I'm amazed that anyone who was serving in government who let COVID happen like that is still in office.
Well, and, that's one of the reasons I ran for the U.S. Senate. I'm a farmer. We're in the egg business. And I saw where government was shutting down schools. They were shutting down churches. They were shutting down businesses, but they weren't shutting down liquor stores. It was just ridiculousness of what our quote-unquote Indiana state elected quote-unquote leaders were doing. I thought, well, there's no one with common sense anymore.
Yeah.
And that's, why I think Sarah is such an awesome candidate, and I hope you would vote for her because, folks, I know what it's like to run for political office. It's not easy. Yeah. And so, my heart goes out to you.
It's hard. And I'm not taking money from big corporations or lobbyists to, I don't want any strings attached. I want to be able to serve Hoosiers. Right. And Hoosiers are suffering with huge property taxes, sales tax, property tax, income tax, death tax. We are being taxed on everything, and so
taxed to drive your car, to work. They're wanting to toll all the roads in Indiana.
Yeah,
now.
But a lot of Hoosiers are giving me $25 or $50 for my campaign. That means I will not have any TV commercials to compete with Jefferson Shreve. I can barely get enough together to do these mailers. And,
what is your website again?
VoteSarahBrown.com. That's Sarah with an H. VoteSarahBrown.com. We do need donations. We do need to be able to make sure everybody knows that I'm running. Everybody who meets me appreciates the fact that I'm on the ballot. And I hope people will get out and vote. A lot of times people don't vote in the primaries.
Yeah,
and
Indiana has the lowest participation rate in primary voting in the country. We are dead last.
Indiana, you have the opportunity to put me into Congress. You have the opportunity, but you've got to vote. You've got to bring your family to vote. You've got to help others vote.
Right. So Tuesday, May 5th, folks, please, please, please get out there, vote. Pull the Republican ballot and vote for Sarah Janisse Brown for the 6th Congressional District.
It might be the first time you vote in a primary, but this matters. It matters so much. If you love your children, you love your grandchildren, you love Indiana, you love America, you appreciate farmers, law enforcement, and military heroes, if you want to see real food growing on Indiana farms, if you're concerned about the SNAP program, buying soda and candy for the kids, please, please vote in this primary.
Right.
You can make the difference.
So awesome. Wonderful. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming in for the program today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. So very good. Folks, thank you so much for listening. I want to close this program with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Yes. Folks, I will see you all again next week on the radio.